So we know that PSMA is a clinically validated target. We have small molecules diagnostically in terms of PET scans, as well as a small molecule that for therapy radiolabels the beta emitter lutetium-177. That's now approved in standard of care. There's also antibodies. Actually, antibodies are a little bit older in terms of how long they've been in existence. And as we showed actually last year at AACR, the uptake and retention of antibodies is actually superior to a small molecule. Small molecules work and they're great, but antibodies also have a place. So two separate presentations, one on conjugated antibodies, one with radiolabeled and one with a drug conjugate. In terms of antibodies, J591 has really been around the longest in terms of therapeutic development, really a couple of decades now. Initially radiolabeled with beta emitters. One of them was lutetium-177, had some phase 1 dose escalation studies of single dose. And actually that single dose was presented with randomized data a couple of months ago at ASCO GU 2023, which delayed improved 18-month metastasis-free survival in high-risk non-metastatic CRPC. But going back in drug development, we also looked at our fractionated dose, which is, I think of as a kind of a dose-intent regimen where half of the dose is administered on day 1 and half the dose is administered 2 weeks later on day 15 of a single cycle. And separate trials, but looking at the overall data with that fractionation schedule, we're able to give a higher amount of cumulative administered reactivity with better tolerance overall in terms of myelosuppression. And with the fractionated schedule, we can actually give it concurrent with docetaxel, small phase 1. And that fractionated dose is actually now in phase 3 trials, not with us, but Telix has taken that over, called TLX591 in a phase 3 trial called Prostate. So anyway, that's the background. We know there's also alpha emitters. Alpha emitters is kind of a high-level statement, are more potent with a shorter range. And we can label antibodies as well as small molecules. So going back a couple of years, we did a phase 1 single dose trial, dose escalation trial, presented at ASCO 2021 that went up, and we did not hit an MTD. So there was one DLT at a 6 dose level, the 7th dose level had 0 out of 6 and expanded. Without patient selection and only one single PSMA selection, with just a single dose, about 2/3 had some PSA decline and about 40% had a PSA 50% decline, whether or not they were exposed to lutetium PSMA in the past. So anyway, the follow-up study is we're presenting one of the cohorts at AACR 2023, where we're looking at a fractionated dose schedule, just like we did with lutetium J591. And by the way, that fractionated dose schedule looks interesting with small molecule with lutetium-617. It's a separate study. So the overall study is now 3 cohorts, a fractionated dose with no prior lutetium exposure, and that's what's being presented now, a fractionated dose schedule with prior lutetium exposure, which is enrolling, and a multiple dose schedule, kind of the more common single dose every 6 weeks, which is on hold right now. So in terms of what is presented at AACR 2023, dose escalation study, PSMA PET's done but not used for patient selection like we've normally done to assess that as a biomarker, and went up to 65 kilobecquerel per kilogram at that dose level, so a total of 130. There were 2 DLTs of thrombocytopenia. One was a grade 2 thrombocytopenia. It was called a DLT because it delayed the subsequent dose by more than 2 weeks, and then one grade 4. So we took a step back, and what we're now calling the recommended phase 2 dose is 60 kilobecquerel per kilogram times 2, or 120 total, where there was 1 DLT out of 6, but that's the recommended phase 2 dose that we're planning to take forward. So that really is the primary endpoint of the study as a phase 1 dose escalation, but there was interesting activity despite lack of PSMA selection. So 95% had a PSA decline of any level, and 70% had a PSA 50, which I think is interesting for a pre-treated patient population without PSMA selection. And that is going to move forward into phase 2. As soon as we get an amendment that we're adding a patient-reported outcome tool called FACT-RNT, which was published earlier this year in JNM, as well as dosimetry, where we're going to assess where some of the daughters go with SPECT and some imaging analysis technology. So, as well, there's a number of other studies that are going on with that particular compound, combinations, et cetera.